Welcome to my presentation of How the Great Religions Began, continued. Book 1, The Religions of India, Part 1, Buddhism, the Religion of the Enlightened One, which, of course, as you may know, is derived from thousands of individuals called Buddhas, but Buddha Yoga was the movement. When the movement stopped, of course, we have a religion being founded, or at least something claiming to be a religion in the eyes of some people. This is the true law of life, said the Buddha. From good must come evil, and from evil must come evil. Buddhism, the religion of the Enlightened One. A prince is born in the land of the Sakyas, which is number 1. In the land of India, on the plains of the Ganges, at the foot of the Himalaya mountains, there lived about 2,500 years ago a clan of Hindus called the Sakyas, and their ruler king, Suddhodana Gautama. King Suddhodana lived at the royal palace in Kapila Vista. He was wealthy and healthy, and all his people loved him. And yet King Suddhodana was not happy. He had no children. Each day, the king made sacrifices to the many gods of the Hindus of that day believed in. Believed that they are gods. He gave much in charity, and for many hours he studied the sacred scriptures of his people. And each day he prayed for a son to rule his people after his death. When the king was already about 50 years old, Queen Maya gave birth to a son, and he was named Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha Gautama. When the news of the prince's birth became known over the small kingdom of the Sakyas, people from all over the land came to congratulate their king and queen. On foot, on horseback, and on elephants, they came to the palace, bringing with them gifts for their newly born prince. Among the many visitors to the palace came 7 holy men from the Himalaya mountains. When Prince Siddhartha was shown to them, all the 7 holy men exclaimed at the same time, "Such a beautiful child was never born before." Then they looked at the little prince again, and again they exclaimed together, "He will grow up to be a very great man. He will grow up to be a very great man." "What do you foretell for my son?" asked King Suddhodana very proudly. "If he chooses a worldly life," the 7 holy men replied, he will become king of the world." The great future for his baby son, foretold by such holy men, made King Suddhodana very happy. He ordered more sacrifices to be offered up to the gods, and more alms to be given to the poor, and the celebration of the palace to be continued for another 7 days. Part 2. The Quarrel of the Cousins. When Prince Siddhartha was still very small, one of his uncles taught him how to manage elephants. Another uncle taught him how to shoot straight with a bow and arrow, and his father taught him how to manage wild horses. Often the young prince went out riding through his father's yellow rice fields, or into the tall forest of mango, tamarind, and sal trees. Or he would run on to the brinks of the river to watch the snow-capped mountains in the distance grow pink and purple toward evening. Most of the time he played with his cousins, who were about his own age. He had one cousin called Nanda, with whom he liked to play. He also had a cousin named Devadatta, but with him he did not like to play, because Devadatta was always boasting and did not always play fair. Once, Prince Siddhartha went into the woods with his cousin Devadatta. Both boys had bows and arrows with them. Devadatta said, "Let us see who can shoot straighter, you or I." They stuck a white bamboo wand into the ground in front of a dark tree, and then walked away 20 paces. "Now let's see who can split that stick," said Siddhartha. "I can," shouted Devadatta. "Then you shoot first." Devadatta straightened his arrow upon his bow and let it fly, but it did not hit the mark, but fell close by it. "I nearly hit it," Devadatta exclaimed happily. "Nearly isn't good enough," Siddhartha replied. Siddhartha repeated what his uncle, who taught him to shoot, often told him. "Then let me see you do better," Devadatta challenged. The young prince raised his bow, set his arrow taut upon the center of the straightened gut, squinted his eyes, then pulled the bowstring taut and let the arrow fly. The arrow hummed through the air and pierced the bamboo wand neatly in the center. "I can do better than that," sulked the jealous cousin. "I can send an arrow that will split your arrow in two." He immediately raised his bow and hastily let the arrow fly. Instead of hitting Siddhartha's arrow, it went up into the branches of the tree and struck the wing of a passing pigeon. The bird fell to the ground, stunned by the sudden shock. Siddhartha ran to pick it up. He was glad to discover that it was not hurt badly, and he warmed it and calmed it in his hands. Then set it free. "That was my bird," Devadatta shouted in anger. "You had no right to set it free. It was mine, not yours. It was I who hit it, not you. Yes, you nearly killed it," answered Siddhartha, "but I saved it, so it was really mine, not yours." Then they quarreled long over whom the bird rightly belonged to. Prince Siddhartha insisted that he who kills an innocent creature has no right over it, but he who saves it from death has a right to it. Devadatta went away, very angry, and for many, many years afterwards, he remembered his quarrel, and never forgave Prince Siddhartha for having freed the pigeon. Three. The prince puts on the sacred thread. When Prince Siddhartha reached his 12th birthday, a great celebration was arranged in the royal palace, and many guests were invited. For at that time, as the son of a good Hindu, the prince had to put on the sacred thread, which is a sort of confirmation. Before the guests of the prince, like all boys of his age, who put on the sacred thread, he took the vow to become an earnest student of the holy books of his father's religion. You know, just like Jesus did, I guess. Well, in the Bible, anyways. When a boy puts on the sacred thread and takes the vow of allegiance to his religion, so the Hindus believe he becomes born again, and from then on he is called a twice-born Hindu. As soon as Siddhartha became a twice-born Hindu, being the king's son, he was sent to the best-known and most learned priest in the Sakya kingdom to receive from them his education. In those days, children did not study geography, nor did they study history, nor did they study algebra and geometry. The only subject they were taught was religion. The books they studied were the Vedas, the sacred scriptures of their religion. These were long books, all written in poetry. Besides the Vedas, they also had many long books explaining their sacred scriptures. Some of these books are very hard to understand. Before Prince Siddhartha could even begin to study all those books, he had to learn a new language. That was because all the sacred books of the Hindus were written not in the language they spoke, but in a very old language called Sanskrit. As soon as Prince Siddhartha learned to read and understand Sanskrit, his teachers, the princes, began to teach him the holy books that explain their religion, which is called Brahmanism, which of course is a more appropriate name for old Hinduism, at least certain factions of it, for the religion called Brahmanism. In the beginning, so the Hindus believed. Well, Hindus believe a lot of things. They always did, as far as we can tell. There was the Brahman, which means the world soul. This world soul was called the Trimurti. The Trimatri. The three and one God. They call him the three in one because they believe Brahman is Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. So, a lot of people didn't personify that. They didn't. They didn't think of it as a separate thing. And, well, anyways. Brahma, so the Hindus believe, created the first being, Manu. And out of the first being, mankind was made. Not all the people in the world were made equal, even though they all came from Manu. From the beginning, there were 4 different kinds of people. Now people say Manu is short for Mahu, Mahanu, Noah. From the beginning, there were 4 different kinds of people. And the 4 different kinds of people came out of the one Manu in this manner. Out of Manu's head came the best and holiest people in India, the priest called Brahmins. Out of Manu's hands came the next best people, who are the kings and warriors. Out of Manu's thighs came the craftsmen of the world. And out of Manu's feet came the rest of the people who belonged to the lowest class. That was how the priest explained. Brahma, the creator, made 4 different kinds of people, some better and some worse. The different kinds of people are called different castes. The higher the caste one is born in, the more advantages in life one has. Only members of the highest caste can be priests and teachers of religion. People born into the lowest caste can never become priests or rulers or have important positions of any kind. The higher the caste one is born into, the more privileges one has. And the lower the caste one is born into, the fewer advantages one has. Now, meritocracy is more important than aristocracy. As time went on, the four castes became divided into many more, until there were thousands of castes in India. If a man of low caste is very good, and very clever, and very brave, is there no chance for him to enjoy the same advantages in life as one of the higher castes? The people asked. No, said the priest. If a man is born in one caste, he can never enjoy the advantages of a higher caste. Then there's no use being good, some of the people decided. Yes, there is, said the priest. If you are good in this life, you will be rewarded in the next life. Which life? The people asked. As you all know, said the priest, every living creature has a soul. This soul comes from the world soul, Brahman. Now Brahman never dies, does he? And so the soul of living things that comes from the world soul never dies. Then what happens to the soul when a man dies? When a man dies, his soul comes out of his body and immediately enters into the body of a newborn babe. If the man leads a good life, he is born again to a higher caste. If he leads a very bad life, he is born again into a lower caste. What if a man keeps on leading one bad life after another? Some people asked. Then he keeps on being born again each time into a lower caste. He may even be born sick and suffer all his life as a punishment for being bad. Or he may be born as a dumb animal. A very, very bad man may be born again as an elephant. I don't see what's so bad about the life of an elephant. And if he is a bad elephant, when he dies, he may be born again as a dog. Again, I don't see what's so wrong with a dog. And if he is a bad dog, he may go down and down until he is born again as a flea or a mosquito. This belief that people's souls enter again into another body after they die, the belief of souls being reborn again and again, is called reincarnation. Now, that savage philosopher idea is a secondary thing that occurs later in mythology of the world, and it's better explained through our own psychology. That, oh, this is a sort of animism sort of thing creeps in to what people believed in that sort of thing. What makes the souls of good people enter into the bodies of higher caste, and what makes bad souls enter the bodies of low castes or animals? The people wanted to know. There is a law of life, said the priest, that good should be rewarded with good, and evil should be punished with evil. That law is called karma, which means the law of the deed. Well, it means something being done, cause and effect, that sort of thing. If one does good, he is rewarded for his good deeds in the next life, and if one does evil, he is punished for it in the next life. That is karma. That was as it should be. The people thought good ought to be rewarded, and evil ought to be punished. It seemed right to them that there should be such a law in life as the law of the deed, called karma. But what if a man keeps on being good, one life after another? Then he is rewarded, the priest replied. If a man of a very low caste leads a good life, then he is born the next time into a higher caste. And is it me, or does it seem like the people who fail the most often in life are the rich people, if you really think about it? But it's not about being rich or poor, or powerful or not powerful. Things go beyond that. If he keeps on being good, the people asked, Then he is born into a still higher caste. The man is a very low caste, leads a good life, and he's born into, and the next time into a higher caste. Then he is born into a still higher caste, and if he keeps on being good, then, said the priest, he may go up and up until he becomes a priest or Brahmin. Of course, you know, he can become one of the people like us, you know. It's like, you know, they made it up if that's, you know, sort of the case. Not even what they do or experience or believe or whatnot. And what if the priest keeps on being good? What is he born into then? Then answered the priest, then he is not born again anymore, but his cycles of lives come to an end. Moksha, moksha, moksha. That's not in here. But what comes to that soul that keeps on being good all the time? You remember, said the priest, that we told you how all the souls of living things come from Brahman, the world soul. Well, when a soul ends the cycle of lives, it returns to the world soul. It becomes one with Brahman. That is called nirvana. And that is the greatest happiness a soul can hope for. Therefore, the priest added, you all ought to lead good lives and do no evil, so that in the end you may hope to become one with the world's soul and enter nirvana, nibbana in Pali. These teachings about how the world was created by Brahman and how mankind came from Manu, the first being, and about the castes and reincarnation and karma and nirvana were written down in books. In these books were also written down the names of all the Hindu gods and all the hymns that ought to be sung to them. Many, many books were written later explaining all these beliefs and telling the people how they ought to live the good life of the religious Hindu. When boys at age of 12 became confirmed and put on the sacred thread, they began to study all those sacred books of their religion. Prince Siddhartha, too, was taught by the priest the teachings of their religion, Brahmanism. For 4 years, Prince Siddhartha remained with his teachers studying. When he returned home to the royal palace at the age of 16, he was as learned in the Hindu religion as any man in the Sakya kingdom. Well, some variety of it, perhaps. Part 5, The Foresights. On the day Prince Siddhartha was born, on that very day, so one story tells, his future wife, the Princess Yasodhara, was also born. And now that the prince was 16 years old, and so very learned, and Prince Yasodhara was 16 years old, and so very beautiful, they were married. King Suddhodana gave his son and daughter-in-law 3 beautiful castles and many servants, and all that they wished for. And for over 10 years, Prince Siddhartha and Prince Yasodhara lived very happily together. The prince was very fond of hunting, and he often went out on hunting expeditions with his bodyguard, Channa. One day, as the prince came home from a hunting trip, he saw a man, all skin and bones, writhing in pain upon the ground. "What is wrong with this man?" the prince asked Channa. "This man is ill and in great pain, my prince," Channa replied. "But why is he ill? That, my prince, is the way of life. All people are liable to become ill." Oh yeah, like at 26 or so, he never saw illness or never became ill. Perhaps. The prince asked no more questions, but he became very sad. The next day, when the prince and Channa went out again, they met an old man, so old that his back was as curved as a tightened bow. His head nodded all the time. His hands trembled like palm leaves in the breeze, and even with the aid of 2 canes, he could hardly walk. "What is wrong with this man?" Prince Siddhartha asked Channa. "Is he, too, afflicted with pain and illness?" "No, my prince, but he was old. This man, and that is the way of old age." Again, the prince returned home feeling very sad. The day when Prince Siddhartha and Channa went out again, they met a funeral procession. The corpse of a man was carried to be cremated, and the widow and children of the dead man followed behind, weeping bitterly. The prince asked Channa for an explanation. "This, my prince, is the way of every man," Channa explained. "No matter whether one is king or pauper, death comes to all alike." Now, not seeing anybody sick, possible. But there's no way in the world that he could make it to 26 without knowing. People get old. People even die. You know, it's like... When the prince returned home that day, his wife had arranged a great festival in the entertainment hall where many trained girls were to dance and sing and play musical instruments. But the prince, too, felt too sad to join in the feast. He went away to his room to think over what he had seen. For nearly 30 years he had lived in palaces and studied many learned books, but he really knew little of life and people. He had spent many years being amused, hunting and fishing, and enjoying one festival after another. But now he had seen sickness and old age and death, and the longer he thought of these, the more unhappy he became. So obviously he was suffering. Instead of just going through difficulty. Something must be wrong with life, he thought, to have illness and old age and death in it. He wondered where suffering came from. In the many holy books he had studied, he had not come across an explanation of how suffering was created. He wondered why all the people in his kingdom could not be as happy as he and his family were. His father could have been lying about that too, or at least keeping it to himself. And when he thought of all the people in his land, he began to realize how hard and wretched the lives of the very poor people must be. Most of the very poor people belonged to the very low castes. The poorest were considered so low that they were not even permitted to go into a temple, to read the Vedas, or to come near anyone who belonged to the higher castes. Prince Siddhartha began to realize for the first time in his life how full of suffering the lives of these poor people must be. He wondered why the Brahma, the Creator, divided people into so many castes. That did not seem right. Somehow, everything he had learned from the Holy Scriptures and the religious books seemed wrong to him. Well, not all scriptures are holy and right, or at least they aren't in part. As he sat there in his chamber thinking, he heard the sound of music and singing coming from the entertainment hall. That made the prince still more unhappy. It seemed wrong to him that one man should have so many riches and so much joy and health and happiness, when there were thousands of unfortunate people suffering illness and poverty. The next day he went out again with Channa. This time he did not go into the woods to hunt, but into the marketplace, where the people gathered during the day. There among the merchants, the prince saw an old monk dressed in coarse yellow robes, begging for food. Though the monk looked old and was dressed so poorly, he had to beg for his food. His face seemed very calm and happy, because despite his difficulty, he was not suffering. He was content with life, as you could say. This monk was one of the thousands of people in India who left their families and their homes and went out into the mountains to live by themselves, where they could think undisturbed about their religion. Now, you should be able to stay in society and develop religiously. That's what religion is. You involve yourself with people. They only came from time to time to the cities to beg for food. If I could live like one of these monks, thought Prince Siddhartha, and spend all my time thinking, maybe I could learn the truth about where suffering comes from and how people ought to live in order to lead a good life. Until I discover that truth, I will be unhappy. Then and there, the prince decided to leave the palace and his family and his wealth, go out into the woods and live like one of the poor monks. We have often heard of beggars wanting to become princes, but here was a prince in India who decided to become a beggar in order that he might search for the wisdom of the world. Now, it's possible that one of the Buddhas was a prophet somewhere. Thulkifil, chief of Kapil. But Buddha's at least 4 people here. When you talk about Gautama Buddha, there's more than one individual that's moved into this story if you look into it historically, but I don't remember the names at this point. So if I remember in the next part, that is what I will say.